There's a $4 tub of fat sitting in a grocery store right now that your great-grandmother would have recognized instantly. She would have known it could feed her family, light her home, wash her clothes, lubricate tools, and waterproof boots. You walk past it every single week, and you do not even see it. Because somewhere between her kitchen and yours, somebody convinced an entire country that this fat was dirty, and they replaced it with a white can of hydrogenated vegetable oil that they swore was the modern, scientific, healthy choice. That can was called Crisco, and the company that made it was Procter & Gamble, the same company that made soap, the same company that made candles, the same company that, by an accident of chemistry, found a way to turn cheap cottonseed oil into something that looked like lard and held its shape on a shelf. So around 1910, they took a new technology called hydrogenation, hardened that liquid cottonseed oil into a pale solid, gave it a clean-sounding name, and launched one of the most effective marketing campaigns in American history. The timing was perfect. A novel called The Jungle had just exposed the filth of the meatpacking plants where lard was rendered, and the public was already nervous about where their animal fat came from. Procter & Gamble pointed at that fear and offered a spotless white alternative that came from a factory instead of a slaughterhouse. And it worked. Within a single generation, lard went from the most useful substance in the American home to a punchline. Nobody discovered it was dangerous. A soap company simply needed to sell an oily byproduct and had the advertising money to rewrite what a nation believed about the food in its own pantry. Welcome to the Survival Research. If you have not subscribed yet, take 1 second right now and click subscribe and the bell. This is the channel where we dig up the knowledge that entire industries spent fortunes burying. And here is what they buried about this one. It is bigger than a cooking fat. The tin your great-grandmother kept by the stove was not a single ingredient. It was an entire household economy collapsed into one container. She did not buy soap because she made it. She did not buy candles because she dipped them. She did not buy boot waterproofing, machine oil, or hand cream because she rendered all of it from the same animal that fed her. One input, nearly a dozen outputs. And every single one of those outputs is now a separate product made by a separate company, sitting in a separate aisle, sold to you at a separate markup. That is the part nobody explains. The Great Depression did not make people poor in skills. It made them extraordinarily rich in them. They could not afford to buy 11 different products, so they remembered how to make 11 different things from one cheap source. A woman in 1932 could not spare $1, but she could turn a pig she raised or fat she bought for pennies into food, light, soap, and protection for her family's gear. And the moment the economy recovered and the factories needed customers again, the entire industrial machine had every reason on earth to make sure her granddaughter never learned how she did it. Because a household that can render its own fat and make its own soap is a household that does not buy soap. And there is no profit in a customer who does not need you. Stop for a moment, because I want to be specific about what is coming. I am about to walk you through 7 things this one fat does. 7 uses your great-grandparents took completely for granted, that you now pay strangers and corporations to provide for you. Cooking that outperforms the seed oils marketed to you as heart-healthy. Soap made from nothing but fat and wood ash, light when the power is gone, cutting oil that machinists still reach for today, leather waterproofing that outlasts every spray can, cast iron seasoning that makes a pan last a century, and a skin balm that costs pennies a jar. 7 uses, everyone verified, with the actual science behind why each works. It is all laid out in the complete survival research documentation. Every use, every ratio, every step-by-step method, in one place. The link is in the description. One access, all the documentation, permanently. But stay with me right here because the first use alone is going to change how you look at that grocery store shelf forever. Let us start with the one everyone thinks they already understand. Cooking. You have been told for 50 years that animal fat is the enemy, that vegetable oil is the safe, modern, heart-healthy choice your doctor would want. Here is what the research actually shows when you read it instead of the commercial. Lard is roughly 40% saturated fat and about 45% monounsaturated fat. That monounsaturated fat is the exact same kind that olive oil is praised for on the front of every bottle. It is in lard in large amounts, and nobody told you. Lard has a smoke point approaching 400 degrees Fahrenheit. That means it stays stable at frying temperatures, where many seed oils begin to break down and oxidize. And the product that replaced it, the hydrogenated shortening they sold as the healthy modern choice, was loaded with trans fats. The same trans fats that decades of research later tied directly to heart disease. The safe choice turned out to be the dangerous one. If you have made it this far, you already understand more about real self-reliance than almost everyone you will ever meet. Subscribe and share this with someone who needs to remember what we were all quietly made to forget. Everything the industry replaced with a barcode and a markup is in the complete documentation. The link is in the description. Now stay with me, because the next 6 uses are where most people have absolutely no idea this single fat can go. That is not a conspiracy theory. It is simply what happens when a company has a warehouse to empty, a marketing budget to spend, and no regulation stopping it from calling its product healthy. And it took almost 100 years for the science to catch up and admit it. For decades, the official advice blamed the saturated fat in lard and butter for the nation's heart disease. More recent research has steadily walked that back, finding the picture far more complicated and the manufactured trans fats and old-style shortening to be the genuine danger all along. There's one more thing about cooking the modern shopper never considers. Properly rendered lard sits on a counter for weeks without spoiling, which is why it survived in households with no refrigeration. In a long emergency, a fat that does not need to be kept cold is worth more than one that does. Now let us talk about soap, because this is where the self-reliance becomes almost unbelievable to a modern person. Your great-grandmother made soap from exactly 2 things: fat and lye. And she did not buy the lye either. She manufactured it from garbage. She poured rainwater slowly through a barrel packed with hardwood ash. Hickory, sugar maple, beech, ash, and buckeye gave the strongest results. The water seeps through the ashes over 6 to 8 hours and trickles out the bottom as a lye solution, strong enough to cut grease off a cast iron pan. She combined that homemade lye with her rendered fat, heated the 2 together, and stirred until the mixture thickened to the consistency of cornmeal mush. Then she poured it into a wooden mold, let it cool and cure, and she had bars of soap. A little salt made a hard bar, left out a soft one. Fire produces ash. Ash plus rainwater produces lye. Lye plus fat produces soap. Every input was already on her property. And the soap she made was not crude. Done correctly, fat and lye produce a genuinely gentle, moisturizing bar, because the reaction that makes soap also produces glycerin, the very thing commercial brands strip out and sell back to you separately as lotion. The third use is light. For thousands of years, before paraffin wax and long before electricity, this is exactly how human beings held back the dark. You melt the fat, you dip a wick into it, you let it cool, and you dip it again. You repeat that until the layers build into a candle thick enough to stand on its own. The poorest households did not even bother molding candles. They used a tallow dip, a reed or strip of twisted cloth soaked in melted fat, and burning in a small dish of grease. It was so cheap it had a nickname, the penny dip. And for families who could afford nothing else, it was the only thing between them and total darkness after sunset. A pure lard candle does smoke. The glycerin naturally in the fat burns too hot to be perfectly clean, and it gives off soot. I'm not going to pretend it is a scented candle from a boutique, but understand the context. When the grid is down, when an ice storm has taken out the power for a week, when the stores are stripped bare, a smoky candle made from cooking fat beats sitting in the dark every single time. And here is the part that matters for you specifically. The fat that lights your home in a blackout is the exact same fat that cooks your food. 1 supply, 2 functions. No second purchase. There's a reason this method survived for so long. Animal fat candles were the standard source of light for ordinary people for most of human history, right up until the 1800s. When you light one in an emergency, you're not improvising. You're falling back on the default that lit the world for thousands of years. And if you want it to burn cleaner, there is an old method. The soot comes mainly from the glycerin in the fat. Render the fat carefully, keep the wick trimmed short, and the flame steadies, and the smoke drops. It will never match a modern paraffin candle, but it will hold a room out of the dark for hours on fuel you already have in the kitchen. The fourth use is one that almost nobody alive still remembers: cutting oil. When a machinist drills, taps, or cuts metal, the cutting edge heats up fast, and without lubrication, the metal can seize, gall, or flash with rust. For well over a century, the answer to that problem was lard oil. Machinists used rendered fat to lubricate the cut, carry heat away from the bit, and protect the fresh metal surface against rust, all at the same time, with one substance. This is not ancient history that died out. Lard-based cutting oil is still used in some machine shops today for threading and tapping, because for certain metals, it simply works better than the synthetic stuff. The same protective quality is why old-timers kept a greasy rag in the toolbox. A thin wipe of fat keeps rust off a blade, an axe head, or a hand tool in a damp shed. The fifth use is the one that will save you real money starting this week: leather waterproofing. Walk into any outdoor or workwear store and you will find small tins of boot wax selling for $15, $20, even $25. Turn the tin over, beeswax, and oil. That is the entire product. Here's a recipe pulled from an outdoor hunting book published in the late 1800s. Equal parts rendered fat and beeswax, melted together gently until they combine into one smooth mixture. Let it cool, and it sets to the texture of petroleum jelly. You rub it into the leather with your bare fingers, then warm it gently with your hands or a low heat so it soaks deep into the hide. The result, in the words of the old-timers who used it, is leather that sheds water like a duck's feathers. And unlike the silicone sprays sold today, it does not rinse off after one wet day. It lasts for months. The exact same mixture conditions and protects leatherwork gloves, belts, harness, and tool sheaths. The fat feeds and softens the hide from within. The beeswax seals the surface against water from the outside. The proportions are forgiving, which is what makes this practical. Roughly equal parts is a firm protective wax. More fat softens it for conditioning dry leather. More beeswax hardens it for sealing against heavy water. It is the same formula museums use to preserve antique hides for decades. The sixth use protects the single most valuable cooking tool you will ever own: cast iron seasoning. A thin film of this fat, baked onto cast iron at high heat, polymerizes into the hard, slick, rust-resistant surface that lets a good pan outlive the person who bought it. It is the same principle as the machinist's cutting oil. The fat bonds into a protective layer that water cannot reach the bare metal through. The industry now sells you spray on seasoning oils for $10 a can. Your great-grandmother used the fat already sitting in the tin by her stove. A pan seasoned this way outlives the person who bought it, the opposite of the nonstick pan you replace every 2 years. The seventh use is the one that surprises people the most, because it sounds like the opposite of everything they have been taught: skin. Rendered fat, especially the cleaner leaf lard taken from around the kidneys, has been used for generations as a balm for chapped hands, cracked heels, split lips, and rough cuticles. It is a heavy, occlusive moisturizer. It seals water into the skin the same way the expensive barrier creams at the pharmacy do. Except those creams often start with petroleum and a far higher price tag. Folk medicine across the world used animal fat as the base for poultices and healing salves, applied to burns, cuts, and inflamed skin long before there was a drugstore on every corner. And it pairs naturally with what you already learned about soap. The same fat that washes you can also heal the dry, cracked skin that hard work and cold weather leave behind. The drugstore sells you a cleanser and a separate repair cream. One tin of rendered fat stands in for both. One honest caution: use clean, properly rendered leaf lard for skin, not old bacon grease full of salt and burnt bits. The cleaner the fat, the gentler it is, and the longer it keeps without turning rancid. Now let us step back and look at the whole picture, because the individual uses are not even the real point. 7 jobs from one tin, and the same animal also gave the cracklings, the bones for broth, and the bristles. Nothing was wasted, because nothing could be. Look closely at what just happened. One $4 tub of fat, 7 jobs, and I deliberately left several more out: cooking, soap, light, cutting oil, leather, cast iron, and skin balm. 7 products you currently buy from 7 different aisles, made by 7 different companies, each taking its own cut of your money. Your great-grandmother bought none of them. She made every one from one animal, using skills passed hand to hand for 1,000 years, then quietly allowed to die out inside a single generation. That is the real story. It is not that lard is some miracle substance. It is just fat. The real story is that an entire web of household self-reliance was dismantled, separated into pieces, and sold back to you one expensive piece at a time. The soap aisle, the candle aisle, the cooking oil aisle, the leather care shelf, the skincare counter, the hardware lubricant rack, everyone sells you a narrow fraction of what one humble tin used to do for almost nothing. And now the honest part, because you deserve the truth and not a sales pitch. You're not going back to a penny dip to light your house, and you are probably not making all your soap from wood ash. Homemade lye is harsh and unpredictable. This was never about pretending it is 1932. It is about understanding that the dependence you live inside was manufactured on purpose. Because here is what does not change. When the grid goes down in a Texas ice storm, when a hurricane cuts off Florida for 2 weeks, when the shelves are stripped bare and the trucks are not coming, the knowledge your great-grandparents carried is not quaint nostalgia. It is a functioning backup system. A $4 tub of fat that can cook your food, light your room, wash your body, lubricate your tools, waterproof your boots, protect your pans, and heal your skin is not a relic of a poorer time. It is the most resilient single purchase in any serious preparedness plan in America. So here's your choice. You can keep walking past that shelf, buying 7 products to do what one used to do, and call it convenience. Or you can learn the skills that once made your great-grandparents almost impossible to render helpless. Subscribe, so the next thing they buried does not stay buried. This knowledge did not die. It was only waiting for someone willing to dig it back up. What your grandparents knew and nobody ever told you. Now you have it.